I remember I was working, just finishing some of my graduate work, and I was working with a company. And when I came in the morning, they had an alarm because they had a radioactive lab, and the safety mechanism actually closed the lab and trapped all the people inside, and they couldn't get out. And so this is normally something that prevents radioactivity when you spill radioactivity in the lab. So the safety mechanism closes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today. We've got a special guest. We're going to talk about fungi, somebody who knows about fungi. We got Dr. Roland Treu, professor of mycology, fungal ecology at Athabasca up there in Canada. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I'm glad to have you. We like smart people and we like nature here. So let's start off. So tell me a little bit about your background. How did you become interested in mycology?
Well, that goes back to my early childhood experiences collecting mushrooms. The fascination that I had with mushrooms, that's among my first memories as a kid, collecting mushrooms and then eating mushrooms. So that's really how it started, and then it was kind of natural to go into mushrooms when I started university.
That was it. So you've always had kind of a love for nature.
For nature, but it was like every kid, I went through all kinds of phases. I had a chemistry phase, I had an ant phase, entomology phase, but it started with the mushrooms, and that has never gone away.
What do you think the idea was behind that curiosity in mushrooms? What was driving this, the way that they would eat the dead stuff, or the fact that some of them were poisonous? What was the attraction?
I think the attraction as a kid was really their mysterious nature. You know, they come up overnight and you get this huge fruit body, and they disappear after a few days. And, we collected only a few species, but I looked at other ones, and some of them were huge, and I was a small kid, so it's even more impressive. So it's really that nature of them. There's always that kind of mystery, which is different from plants. You know, they are trees; they're all the time, and a flowering plant, at least it has a few weeks or months to develop. And but the mushrooms that just come out of the blue, and there's lots of folk myths about, how the thunderstorms bring them out, and the fairies and all that. So,
right.
So that just added to my fantasy as a kid, and I got hooked at probably 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, you have these things called fairy rings, which are these kind of blooms that go in circles, which is kind of amazing. But you're from Germany, right? What is the culture like for mushrooms compared to maybe other places? I know in America it's not as strong. So what was it like in Germany growing up? Did you go mushroom picking a lot, or?
Yes, exactly. That was now. If you read the works of Gordon Wasson, who was the person who actually developed the term ethnomycology, he was talking about that difference in cultures between, for example, him hailing for the Anglo-Saxon culture on one extreme end, where mushrooms were basically a bad thing, In the English language, the British English language, people use the term toadstool. That's to signify that something really bad. In North America, most people use mushroom, and so that's in one extreme, and then on the other extreme, you have the Russian or Slavic people in general, where everyone collects mushrooms, and so. And German culture is somewhere in between. It's probably not as extreme as in Eastern Europe, but it's considerable. And the best way to actually find out how deep mushrooms are rooted is in a particular language or culture. You just have to look at the folk names of mushrooms, which is quite interesting. So you could do a linguistic study that would coincide with, because it's amazing how many folk names mushrooms have. For example, in the German language, and in the English language, they are now creating them because things change too. But traditionally, there have been huge amounts of folk names, sometimes tens for one particular popular mushroom, and even different ones in different parts of the country. So that's how you can kind of even scientifically study how deep a mushroom culture is rooted in a particular country.
So there would be these great stories attached to each kind of mushroom, and within the stories, maybe they warn you not to eat this kind because you'd have some horrible experience, or.
Yeah, I mean there's always the bad guys sometimes have bad names and the good guys, but not necessarily. In particular, in the German language, it's usually quite descriptive. You have basically these long names like Knollenblätterpilz, where you have all these pieces of information about the morphology of the mushroom in the name, but if you go to the rural areas, there's probably folk names where that are a bit more evocative of whether it's good or bad.
Yeah,
I mean, my favorite mushroom is the fly agaric, and even there we don't know where the name comes from. Most people think it's because it used to be used for poisoning flies, among many other things. That's just a tiny little thing. But flies have also been associated with a state of mind, and if somebody has flies in the brain, he is kind of crazy. That's what you get when you eat the fly mushroom. Fly agaric.
Good to know.
So,
yeah, I might have a few flies in my brain too. Yeah, and that's in German. This is a great translation. Germans have great long names for everything, that you can describe something in one word. Just take your time, make it as big as you want. And you also say, when somebody's crazy, you say, "Oh, he's got a bird in his head." Right?
Yeah. There's actually a bird's nest fungus.
Really?
As well, which also in the English language, it looks like it's a tiny little cup, and you see something like little eggs in there. So it's obvious that you would name something like that a bird's nest fungus.
Funny. And what is it? So what does it eat? This fungus?
There's two ways that fungi get their nutrition from. One is breaking down dead substrate, for example, dead leaves, a tree stump, dead wood, that's basically what we call saprotrophic or saprobic fungi. And that's a huge chunk of fungi that do that. So for example, when you grow oyster mushrooms, that's what they do. They break down whatever you use, straw or wood chips, and they break that stuff down. That's one way for fungi to get their nutrition. And I would say, a ballpark figure would be 50% of fungi do that. Okay. And then the other 50% there's a very small part that are parasites. So they basically get things from other organisms. For example, you have a parasitic parasitic mushroom growing on a tree. And then it might kill the tree after a while, like some of the polypores do that. They are parasites, but that's a small percentage. And then you have the other big way of nutrition is basically mutualistic nutrition, where you get something from the host plant, but in exchange you give something back. So, and that's where when you look at mycorrhizal fungi, they are the ones that basically bring minerals and water to the tree, and then in exchange they get carbohydrates from the tree.
Yeah.
So that's the other that's a huge chunk of fungi that do that.
So this notion,
sorry, go ahead.
But this notion that the mycorrhizal fungal network is existing underground, is this new information for us and in regards to agriculture and forestry?
Not really new. It has become more to our attention. Usually these kind of things are known for decades until somebody writes a book about it and explains it to a broader audience. But it's definitely not new. We have known that fungal mycelium is connected with the roots for a long time, and we have studied. That's one of the things that I did in my in my PhD thesis, looking at some of the mycorrhizae in a national park, where basically almost every tree has a whole community of fungi on their roots. And so when we teach in botany that the roots of the plants are the place where the water and the minerals come in, that's only partly true, because most of the job is done by the fungi actually.
Yeah.
And then the more we studied that, the more we became aware that it's not only one fungus and one tree, but it's actually a huge community, and the fungi connect trees to each other. And they have even found that you can have a flow of carbon or nitrogen from a host from a tree that lives in a deficient place from another one that gets enough nutrients in a good location. So that's these things are happening, and they're happening across different species, and so everything is really connected underground. And for us humans, of course, that's where practical applications come in. The mycorrhizal inoculations of crop plants, of trees, that has been done for many decades.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I've been using it myself in my garden. Fantastic results. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. Yeah. And the real important message, though, is that every species of fungus is different. because we biologists, we have a tendency to study pet organisms like Drosophila or whatever. Somebody publishes a work about a particular species, and then the whole community is, everyone is working on that one species.
Right.
And while in reality, I see it with my mushrooms, each one is different. And that's basically the big message that kind of comes out from whenever I look at that. That species, that one species is different from the next one and the next one and the next. And that means when you're looking for fungi to as a tool for whatever you want to do, whether it's bioremediation or inoculation of trees, you have to make sure that you know your mushrooms, your fungi, your fungal species, because one might be perfect, the next one might be not so good.
Yeah. And you just mentioned bioremediation and stuff. So what was your area of expertise in mycology? What did you focus on, and what have you been working on recently?
Yeah, maybe I start with the more recent one, and that is bioremediation. So I'm looking at the potential of mushrooms to clean up things, or to accumulate toxic substances. Now, there's two different areas there. One is carbohydrates. Well, I should say not carbohydrates, hydrocarbons. So anything that is related to, say, crude oil products. That's basically hydrocarbons. Now, the good thing about that is that if you come up with a good system, potentially the mushrooms could completely clean that up. And so the perfect bioremediation would be to release carbon dioxide and water. So there is a potential for doing that with hydrocarbons. The other area is heavy metals, and heavy metals is, or I should say metals in general, including radioactive metals. Fungi have the ability to accumulate that to a very high degree. And so if you had the ability to then harvest them and put them away, you could actually clean up soils as well. But the downside of that is you're not gonna get rid of the heavy metals. And so all you could do is you concentrate it somewhere and then you take them away. And the dirty secret of most of remediation is getting the pollutants away from one place and then show the success. But that doesn't, you still need to deposit it.
It's like a sponge, right? It absorbs whatever thing, but it's still in the sponge. You got to get rid of the sponge. Okay. I get it.
Yeah. And so the classic remediation is often just you remove the topsoil. Say you have a mine or hydrocarbon contaminated area. You remove the topsoil and then you replace it, and then you do your chemical analysis, and then you find it's below a certain threshold, and then things are fine. Yeah. So that's but. That's important to consider, because usually when I tell students about that, they're very disappointed. But you cannot get rid of a metallic element because it cannot be released through the atmosphere normally.
Yeah.
So that's something to know.
And these things can show up again in mushrooms and fruits and vegetables and stuff just through the process of being in the soil.
And they have been big time. This was one of these experiences that kind of made me feel very bad a few decades ago when we were in the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster. And so the mushrooms, the amount of radioactivity in mushrooms was absolutely mind-boggling, and nobody would eat mushrooms anymore for years afterwards, and that's because they have the ability to. So what's happening is the mycelium in the soil has a strong ability to accumulate the radioactivity, but on top of that, when you form fruit bodies, you get another process of concentration where all this mycelium gets together, because that's what the fruit body is. It's a condensed mycelium. And then you have basically these two mechanisms, and then you're basically full of radioactivity. And the stuff that we got, the main contaminant was cesium-137, and that has a half-life of 30 years. So we are just a little bit below half of that radioactivity now. So you know, that's it attests to the and see, the mushrooms have that ability together with lichens, which are basically fungi too. They surpass any other organisms. We had radioactivity even in the milk. Sometimes even the milk was too radioactive, but lots of it in berries. But due to these mechanisms of concentration, nowhere else than in mushrooms you would get radioactivity just going through the roof. And I remember I was working, just finishing some of my graduate work, and I was working with a company. And when I came in the morning, they had an alarm because they had a radioactive lab, and the safety mechanism actually closed the lab and trapped all the people inside, and they couldn't get out. And so this is normally something that prevents radioactivity when you spill radioactivity in the lab. So the safety mechanism closes everything down. And this was radioactivity that came from the outside, it was all in the air, you know. And so it was so strong that it trapped people inside. They had to call the firefighters to break open the doors and all that. So this was my Chernobyl experience. And then, of course, most people. And I can tell you, I've never seen so many mushrooms in the forest ever again as after Chernobyl, because people did not collect them. I was overwhelmed by the mass of mushrooms which shows how many are actually collected by people normally.
Yeah. But I mean, these are extremely resilient too, and somehow they're thriving. How are they thriving with all that radioactivity? Does it just not affect them, or would it initially, or did it take them time to get used to it? How do they do it?
I do not have a single paper that would describe any negative effect on mushrooms. The way they do it is the same way they handle their life, you know, even in the absence of radioactivity. If you have a mycelium in the soil or in the substrate, it's such a versatile organism. The hyphae grow in one direction, and when they come to a patch that's empty, they might all die, and then occasionally new hyphae come in. They even grow inside the old hyphae, the new hyphae grow, and they basically recycle everything. And so the mycelium is just going wherever the good stuff is and avoids wherever the bad stuff is. So if you have the radioactivity, there might be patches of mycelium that are affected, but they don't seem. We have never seen any indication that they are affected, and that's.
But you don't think that we're at the end of the road as far as seeing what we can bioremediate with mushrooms, or like how long we haven't studied them long enough to know if they can break down these radioactive metals, or at least get rid of the radioactive part of it, or
no, they see that's the point for any. If you have, let's just take the example of cesium-137. It's basically used. It kind of replaces the potassium, so fungi use it instead of that, and that radioactive material stays there. So we really have to wait until the radioactivity is gone, because it's an element,
Okay.
Cesium, that's, you cannot break it down chemically. It's an element, so we have to live with that.
30 years.
No, 30 years is the half-life. That means after 30 years, half of that is basically broken down. Half of that radioactivity is broken down. And then after another 30 years, another half is broken down. So a rule of thumb is when you have you take the half-life of a radioactive element times 10, that's kind of when most of the stuff is gone. So we are talking about 300 years from 1986. You're not getting any detection of that. So that's how these are geological things or physical things that we just have to live with.
So biological beings have a better chance at adapting to the radioactivity rather than the radioactivity dissipating on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not going to dissipate. All you can do is dilute it. And what we know, for example, from the radioactivity, they started to look at that after Chernobyl. If you go down, I don't know how many tens of centimeters in the soil, you suddenly find another layer of radioactivity from a previous event, and that was actually originating from nuclear bomb testing, which I think they stopped that in the 70s or late 60s, but there was lots of testing of nuclear bombs in the 60s. So some of us have grown up with that stuff, and at that time nobody even knew it was around, but you can still find that stuff in one layer of the soil where it slowly moves down. And
right.
Once that is out of the reach of the roots, it's probably not gonna bother us anymore. But we're not quite there yet. And the fungi that grow in there, they might recycle that and bring it even back up. So it's not always what we would necessarily
like you
want.
said, it's a sponge. It still has the stuff in it. It's just in its own spot. But still, it's a little bit human beings, right? As we just love to invent stuff that just ruins our environment.
Yeah, absolutely. But as I said, the good news is about potentially the hydrocarbons. That could be a different story, because what mushrooms can do potentially with hydrocarbons. For example, there's studies from, all I can say is decades ago, that something like DDT can be broken down by mushrooms.
Thank God.
So that opens a huge potential. The problem always is how can you make that, bring that into a scale where humans can actually use it? So can you go to contaminated site and then break the stuff down? And that's kind of what I am interested in, because again, the ability of mushrooms to bioremediate has been known for decades, but all that neat, fancy papers they have done in vitro, basically, so they put it in a flask. They created a system where they could break down contaminants, and then they found, at the end, mushrooms had broken down that stuff. But how do you make that into a process that could be used industrially? And that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, at scale seems like the thing to do. And so let me ask you this: maybe you know, maybe you don't know. Is DDT it's related to some of the pesticides that we use today in agriculture? Do you think that using mushrooms as kind of a cover crop to heal soil, or spreading mycorrhizal fungus on a field that's been farmed, is that a possibility in the future?
It's a possibility, but you still have the same problem. Well, it depends. It highly depends on what crop you are talking about, because there's even, for example, if you use the common crops that we use here, they have different fungi on their roots, or mycorrhizal fungi on the roots, compared to what you find in a tree root. So these are ectomycorrhizae. And the other one on a typical crop, we call them arbuscular mycorrhizae. So, but yes, the possibility exists, but you still have the issue of how can you do it at scale?
Yeah. That's for a lot of new emerging technologies for food production stuff, where it sounds good on paper. You got to scale it up. We got to figure out how to do that. But you also did some research related to ectomycorrhizal fungi and its relation to the pine beetle. Like, it's in decline. What's going on there?
Well, that's basically a good example of the whole field of ecology, where you have one problem being the pine beetle, and it affects obviously trees, and so that's the part that we know, and it's bad, and people are trying to somehow remediate that. But what you also have to do is, when the trees are affected, how does that affect the associated fungi? And so that's where we basically looked at mycorrhizae and mushrooms associated with that. And to make a long story short, and that goes kind of through most of the work I've done, is you really need to look at particular species. There's a whole community in the soil, and some of these mushrooms are actually declining as a result. Others are doing fine. Others might even thrive. So again, it's the same story. You have to know your species, which one is doing what, and only then you can kind of get a rough idea what's happening with the community. But it's like everything that is related to ecology. You introduce a disturbance that may or may not be typically caused by humans, but that disturbance would then cascade into the whole ecosystem. And so when you just look at, the trees are dying, that's one part, but what's happening as the result? Can there be potentially other fungi that can somehow remediate that? That's all a part of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no one remedy that cures that, but you have to know what's going on a systemic base. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Do you think we'll hopefully find a grip? So when climate change increases, we're going to have issues with all kinds of things. But it sounds like fungi might actually be the beneficiary in a lot of ways. Is there anything about climate change that puts fungi in jeopardy other than this last example we had?
It depends where in the world you are, because even with climate change, there's a few areas that might benefit from it, So if you are in an area that so classic example, climate change causes droughts in some parts of the world. That's devastating for the associated fungal organisms. So they are very badly affected by that. Mm-hmm. Now, if you get areas with flooding that were previously kind of normal, and then you get flooding and lots of moisture, fungi can actually profit from that. So it's very hard to make a definitive statement. All we can say is it's gonna wreck the existing system.
Yeah.
Eventually, it will develop into something new, but you cannot say it's bad for all of them, because you have to look at that patchwork of habitats that the planet is,
Yeah. And you'd have to consider the domino effect of other species, the unseen knock-on effects that, who knows, it might wipe us all out very quickly, leaving the Earth kind of barren like Mars with very little, maybe some tardigrades.
That's not going to happen. It's that's the good news. Yes, humans might be. Well, I shouldn't say that's good news, but our ecosystems, our planet is incredibly resilient, and I do not think that even if our civilization is wiped out, that it will mean the end of life on Earth. Life is incredibly resilient.
Out of all the creatures that are on Earth, the kangaroos, the mushrooms, the corn, what do you think would be, who are you rooting for to inherit this planet after humans invariably kill themselves?
Well, I'm biased, of course, and I know that mushrooms and fungi can handle that. But the other group that would be on top of my list are the insects. If you look at the amount of radioactivity that, for example, a cockroach can tolerate, they wouldn't have a problem with nuclear war. So lots of cockroaches will be around. Fungi will survive as well, and even some humans might survive and have a very miserable existence.
Yeah, that too. Eating each other and whatnot. I've seen that stuff in the movies. I'm sure it's completely possible. But yeah, well, we should have stayed simple in the evolutionary terms. We should have, been like the cockroaches, just kind of modest, little trash-eating little bugs. Not a bad life.
Well, I'm not particularly in favor of them because I had them in the various places where I lived. I had lots of cockroaches, and they're not fun, really.
No, they're not fun to be around especially if they're on food. Which I've been to Mexico and stuff like this in the South in the United States. Oh, it's bad. But I'm in Germany now. It's not. When Germans see bugs, they're just grateful, and Germans I find are more ecologically conscious, Well,
of course, don't forget the discussions that's now encouraged on even by the United Nations on eating bugs. And, of course, that would bring us back to the mushrooms because various cultures eat considerable amount of mushrooms. It's a great source of protein, actually.
Oh yeah, delicious. Cook it up with some onion, and that, as I'm one of those vegan idiots. I can't eat bugs, so that's out the window. I'll have to take lentils and oyster mushrooms. That actually sounds pretty good. I don't know. Do you grow edible mushrooms at home?
I do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
What do you got?
Right now, I'm just doing oysters. I had a few. I just harvested a bunch, and I'm doing a little bit of other stuff like enoki. I just tried for the first time, and I'm going more into that because living here in the cold place of Athabasca, we have about 6 months of winter, so I need something to keep me going in winter because our field season is so. I just happen to have one here. That's a Leccinum mushroom.
Are you kidding me? Look at this thing.
Yeah, so it's coming out of that's a yogurt. I'm just trying these things out, partly for fun and partly also for my research.
That's awesome. It's so tubular. It's like very thin.
Well, that's how you would actually you can make it depending on the environmental conditions. So if you give more moisture or more oxygen, they become much more broad.
Okay.
So it depends on environmental conditions. The Chinese grow them on an industrial scale, and you can create all kinds of shapes from these things.
Totally edible, delicious.
Actually, this is probably one of the. I think in China it's the most used medicinal fungus.
Okay.
If you show that to Chinese people, they all know Lingxi. That's the medicinal fungus in China.
That is so cool. What is it supposed to be good for?
Pretty much everything. it's kind of I heal all, but it has effects on blood pressure. They have used it to inhibit cancer. So they're kind of in China. That's a very active field of research, much more than here. But the Lingxi is at the forefront, and recently we have found out that this is way more than. There's a problem with the naming of these mushrooms. So what we thought is Ganoderma lucidum is probably not Ganoderma lucidum. There is, by the way, in my previous lives, I had worked for a place in England, and they were looking at parasites on trees, and there's a species actually in the same genus Ganoderma that is a nasty parasite on oil palms. So they are. It's an interesting group.
I think that this stuff is so understudied too, because I see people on the internet. They say, "Well, I got this thing growing on my tree. I'm really scared. Should I poison it? What should I do?" And somebody just says, "Cut it off and eat it. Put it in a frying pan. That's good eating."
Exactly. Exactly. And this is actually probably the most frequent question that I get, because we have the fairy ring mushroom that's very common around here, and the most frequent question is not is it edible? It's actually how can I kill it? Because I have it in my lawn, and they form the fairy rings, and there's lots of stories around that. But that's what people are concerned about.
Free food. It's free food.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people, and they are kind of surprised that you can eat these things.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the tide turns and we become a fungi, conscious society again instead of drive-throughs and.
We have to go a long way. I remember when I was doing a presentation on bioremediation, some really practical application how that could be done in some of these oil polluted areas. I was actually showing people some of the mycelium that I'm growing and how that could be used. And the very first question that came, was on these mushrooms dangerous? So they have there's pollution probably in 20% of the province is problematic because it's polluted areas from the bitumen sands and then you try to come up with a biological remedy, and you hear that concern about the mushrooms being poisonous, potentially being poisonous. That's what's going on. So we have to change attitudes, obviously.
Yeah, or if you want to go pick mushrooms, make sure you bring a Geiger counter.
Yeah, well, it's in fact, that's something I would like to look at some point, because we had a few years ago, we had, I forgot the name of the place in Japan where they also had a nuclear accident.
Oh, yeah, Fukushima.
Fukushima, yeah. And I saw some of the prevailing winds. They might have brought some of that stuff over here. So it would be interesting to check in BC whether we find some traces here as well. Yeah. That's something to do for when I'm running out of ideas.
Yeah, right. I just assume it's everywhere and just get my body acclimated to being completely radioactive and glowing in the dark.
It's even during Chernobyl. The interesting thing is it was really patchy, so it's not everywhere. You could be even close to Chernobyl at that time when it happened, and there's almost nothing. And the reason is that cloud came over, and then whenever the rain came down, that's where the stuff got in. So, and if the cloud had past you and no rain was there, you would have almost nothing. So, you have to know a bit about climate and weather events as well to kind of make a prediction where they are.
Wow. I never thought of that. It could have very well have a nuclear explosion. It goes up into the clouds, and then it actually never rains and just floats across to the other side of the world and dumps radioactive rain on them.
Exactly, it could happen. And the other thing that we noticed was that everything that grows on wood had almost no or very little radioactivity. Other species were full of them. So you can probably still grow your oyster mushrooms after such an event because you get the wood doesn't take out much of the radioactivity.
Good to know. Who knows what conditions I'll have to grow my own food under in the future. And as far as when you get a few harvests out of a box of mycelium brick that you have, how do I keep it going?
See, I have the excuse that everything I do in the lab, that's for research, of course. And so, the mushrooms I'm growing, I'm saying that only half jokingly because I'm getting a lot of, research idea I actually got from the mushrooms I'm growing at home. Yeah. And so I have a culture collection in my lab. And so, I can use that to freshly inoculate, new substrates. So, that's very simple when you have a little mycological lab. Even if you don't, sometimes I would buy just a pack of oyster mushrooms in the store, and then you make a fresh culture. Okay. So, and then that potentially lasts you for forever,
So the spore, you take a spore print or put it in liquid or something, and that will keep for a while, but.
You could take a spore print, but it depends on, yes, that's one method to take a spore print, but usually I just take a piece of the fruit body, put it on a petri dish with a nutrient agar, and then it starts growing. As long as you do that, as long as you avoid contamination, that's all you need to do.
From the fruiting body. You mean like down at the stem where the mycelium is kind of still fuzzy, or?
The best place, they say, is close to where the gills are.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So that's how I got most of my, I have a culture collection of probably about 100 different species here. And most of them, now some only work with spores. Others, you take a piece that's the majority, and then there's a few that almost refuse to grow. That will be a separate issue. So not all mushrooms grow easily in culture, but oyster mushrooms certainly do.
Cool. And they all enjoy some kind of medium as far as wood chips or rye or something like this.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Again, oyster mushroom is probably the one with the broadest. We've grown oyster mushrooms in Papua New Guinea, and this is the species that is grown around the world.
That's my beginner. That's the one I first started and I just loved. And now we're getting into the exotics. Hopefully, eat more and more wild ones. I just had some pink oysters.
You do?
Yeah. That was very good. Very good. But yeah, well, I'll ask you for your recommendations next time I'm shopping for mushroom stuff. I'm hoping to get my thing together. But yeah, well, we'll leave it here. You come back. Tell us about your research in the future.
I would love to if you invite me back. Well, sure.
You're easy to talk to.
I have some interesting things going right now, and I, due to the nature of my job, I have to sometimes find the time to do my research, but there's some interesting things going on. The good things about mushrooms is you can do it almost anywhere in the world, and you always find interesting stuff to do.
I like how you take your work home with you too, because they're not gonna make a big fuss. I would want a professor who takes his work home with him. He's very passionate. He loves what he does. Yeah, go ahead. Take some spores home. Take some,
Yes, and of course, it doesn't hurt if you can eat them. But
yeah, right.
Of course, it's all about the research.
Yeah, it's all part of it, right? It's all part of it. And next time we're going to talk about LSD and the CIA, because last I saw an interview you gave is quite interesting. So we'll definitely have you back in the next couple months. But yeah, so I want to thank you, Dr. Roland Treu, Professor of Mycology, Fungal Ecology, all around wonderful human being down there at Athabasca University, very controversial university. Anything you want to add before we go?
If anybody out there wants to study mushrooms, try to do it, because we don't have enough mycologists. We need more mycologists who actually know the species. So any student of biology who doesn't know what to do should look into that field, whether they can develop a passion for it.
You hear that, folks? It's understudied, and we need people to step up and know their stuff, because fungi could be miracle breakthrough, save us, save humanity, save us all. And they're just interesting. Painfully interesting. Yeah. All right, Dr. Roland Treu, we'll sign off to everybody here, but we'll talk after. So bye, everybody. Thanks for coming. See you next time.
And thanks for having me.